Hello, and welcome to the Solidarity Show, your weekly show that brings you all that is new in union news. Now, as always, I'm joined with my co-host, Liam O'Brien, Assistant Secretary of the ACTU.
Hey, Emma.
Liam, I'm in your chair. Where are you?
You're in the big chair today. I'm in Sydney, hiding out in my hotel room at the moment.
Nice.
Hopefully not, making the neighbours annoyed at the loud noises that are going to come from here for the next 45 minutes.
Well, everybody needs a recruitment conversation.
Oh, absolutely. And indeed in hotels in particular.
Exactly.
Big shows tonight, Emma.
It sure is. So we've got a big show on this evening. We have Lara Watson, who's the Indigenous Officer here at the ACTU. And she's going to be talking about Mabo Day, its significance, Reconciliation Week, and all activism that's going on in the First Nation Workers Alliance. We also have a union update with and a regular Q&A with you, Liam. I know there's plenty to talk about in terms of certain meetings that's been going on. We have a union hero from the Frontline, Jocelyn Hoffman. She's an aged care nurse. So if you want to talk about Frontline, she's seen a lot. We've also got our regular segment with Francis Leach, and we have a very special interview with filmmaker Robynne Murphy and Louise Casson on Women in Steel documentary on a campaign by union women against sexist barriers to employment at steelworks at Point Kembla. That is a beauty of a documentary. And then finally, our famous activist ask.
Yeah, really looking forward to the interview with Robynne about the Steel campaign, because it's a great story, and we previewed the trailer last week and it looks really good and want to share that with everyone. Look, before we do get on to our next segment, which is really important, I do want to acknowledge traditional owners on the land on which we meet and pay my respects to elders past and present, which is really important, obviously, every week, but more so even this week, because it is the end of Reconciliation Week and today is Mabo Day, and I can't think of a better guest to have on next in terms of Lara. And, it's going to be great to hear from Lara about how important this day is and talk about what's happening in her community. But I think it's also important to talk about in the context of what we're seeing internationally as well, in particular around what's going on in the US and the deaths in custody issue that has been a really serious issue, both overseas, but indeed in Australia over the last God knows how many years. So, I think it's a really important point in time for us to reflect on just the levels of inequality that First Nations people suffer from here, and indeed how that leads to really significant high rates of incarceration in this country, and the really appalling outcomes that Indigenous people receive in this country. And the analogies across to the US, which in some respects are different, but I think even more poignant now that we see. So it's great to have Lara on. I'm hoping she's here with us now. Lara, are you there?
I'm here. How are you?
I'm good, comrade. How are you?
Very good, thank you.
Well, welcome. Welcome back. You're on our first inaugural show.
Thank you very much. I too would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians, wherever people are. I'm actually on Yagara country, so pay my respects to elders past and present.
Thank you for joining us again, Lara. Today is Mabo Day, commemorating the life and activism of Eddie Mabo. Can you tell us a little bit about the significance of the day?
Yes, so on this day in 1992, the High Court of Australia had made the decision that terra nullius should never have applied to Australia, and that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people had the right to the lands. So it was a pretty big deal for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. It also, set the precedents for other cases, but also was the pillar in starting the native title legislation, which was in place the following year. But Mr. Mabo was definitely the leader of this fight. I'll call him Mr. Mabo because in my culture, we don't actually say the first names of those that have passed, and Mr. Mabo has passed. So give you a bit of a short, very brief overview. There were 5 men, including Mr. Mabo from the Murray Islands, that had taken this court case on. And it had all come about from Mr. Mabo talking to a group of people at a university on what it meant to him and his connection to country. And from that, a lawyer went down and had a chat to him about, you know, how do we move forward with this? And that's how the court action started. But it went on for 10 years. So it was a long fight, and they definitely fought for all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and our right to be able to access our country because of that connection. But unfortunately, Mr. Mabo passed away 4 months shy of this decision being passed down. So it really is commemorating his work and achievements as well as the decision that was made on this day.
Yeah, thanks for that, Lara. Look, as I said earlier, Mabo Day today sort of marks the end of Reconciliation Week. Can you tell us a little bit about the week and what the major issues have been in terms of the ongoing campaign for justice for Indigenous people in this country?
Yeah, so I guess a lot of people probably don't know this, but Reconciliation Week had originally started out as a prayer week for reconciliation from some of Australia's largest religious organisations. In 3 years from that, it turned into National Reconciliation Week, and then in 2001, Reconciliation Australia was formed. And I guess probably from 2001, it really is about celebrating and building relationships, like respectful relationships between Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people and the rest of Australia. An Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander view, in some sense, you know, reconciliation is a long way away, and we don't want people to be complacent that everyone's all happy and working together in this 1 week. There are still issues that underline that. I know you mentioned before about deaths in custody, and that is a prime example. You know, since the Royal Commission happened, there's been 432 deaths in our prison system of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and that equates to a higher percentage than before the Royal Commission was taken. You know, you look at the Northern Territory intervention, Now Stronger Futures, that is still in place in the Northern Territory. Like, that takes away all rights of being a human being, basically. And it's still in place from the Sacred Children's Report, but nothing was found through that investigation in the Howard years. So it's absolutely mind-boggling why it's still in place. You know, CDP, this is the campaign that we're in 24/7, and it's still really unreal for a lot of people to know that there are Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander workers in this country, in remote communities, that are in work or doing work for jobs that we consider to be wage jobs, and they get the equivalent of a job seeker payment. So this is still happening. I mean, we've got, I guess, you know, we've got waste, radioactive waste dumps that want to be dumped on hunting land. You know, there's just a lot still that needs to be addressed when it comes to the rights of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples.
Laura, you mentioned CDP. Can you, for our viewers that might not be across the community development program, can you just describe a little bit about that, and what are some of the issues First Nation workers are confronting during this pandemic?
Yeah, so the Community Development Program is basically a work for the dog program that only operates in remote Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander communities in Australia. The other work for the dog program is Job Active, but there are some significant differences between the two work for the dog programs. The hours is one example. So if you're a CDP worker, you're doing 530 hours more than what a Job Active participant would do. They are actually in what we consider wage jobs, but not getting a wage. And what we're seeing more and more of is those very few jobs in communities, they're being filled by CDP workers. So not only is that CDP worker not getting the wage or the workplace conditions as a worker, there's a person in the community that's just lost a job and lost an income. So it's like a double whammy in remote communities.
Yeah, it's really shameful, really, when you think about it. I mean, Lara, we talked earlier on in one of the first shows that we did about the First Nations Workers Alliance. But it'd be interesting to hear from you about how people at home can get involved in the First Nations Workers Alliance, and tell us a bit more about what you guys are doing in terms of advancing these issues.
Yeah, so we're doing quite a bit of work at the moment in remote communities online. You know, if people want to get onto the First Nation Workers Alliance Facebook and just share the posts, that goes a long way in raising awareness around what is happening in communities, because it's not being reported on in mainstream media. A lot of these guys, if they don't turn up for an activity, they risk being breached for 8 weeks. So that's no payment coming in whatsoever. So we're quite, I guess, on the edge of our seat at the moment to see how this mutual obligation stuff will be rolled out in remote Aboriginal communities. We've got a website, so the First Nation, I think it's fnwa.org.au. You can actually join First Nation Workers Alliance there. It's only $52 for non-Indigenous and $26 for Indigenous, but you do have to be a union member to join. So that is a must. And, you know, if you want to put a little bit more extra into it, I'm sure I can find some activities. So you just drop me an email that you've got some spare hours, and we'll go from there.
So there's plenty of things to be doing, right? So
absolutely.
Lara, don't worry, everybody on here is a union member. Everybody who watches a union member. They wouldn't be let in, right?
Yep.
Anybody can join the First Nation Workers Alliance, but there's plenty of work to be done. You said let's not be complacent. There is a huge amount of injustices that are happening. And if you want to be support right now, if you want to get active, go to that FNWA website. Lara, thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks, Lara.
Thanks for having me. Happy Mabo Day.
Liam, next is a union update, and we've got a few questions that have come in through the week, but I'm going to throw it over to you. What's happened this week?
Well, it has been a big week. In particular, it's been a big day. I think, and I really want to start with the economic data that came out today. And, it did confirm, not that we really needed that confirmation, that we are in a recession. What's important about the data today is it really covers the first 3 months of this year. And if you actually think back, and I know it's hard to think back this far, we're in the 6th or 7th episode of the Solidarity Show, but it's actually about sort of 10, 11 weeks when the real shutdown started. And actually, that was only the last 2 weeks of March that we really saw that sort of significant impact of COVID on this quarter. So for us to be down in terms of economic output for the March quarter is really telling about how weak the economy was going into COVID. But what's even worse, if you actually unpick the figures, they're actually a little bit more shocking than the headline, negative 0.3 sort of talks about. And in particular, what you need to look at is household consumption being down 1.1%. And in particular, that's really important because, as I've said before, over half of our economy, over half of our output is contributed to by you and me and all the other workers and households out there spending their money and buying things and consuming. So when household expenditure is down, that says something about just how weak, consumer spending and indeed wages are. What's even worse is that actually, if you reflect back on that sort of first 2 to 3 weeks of the pandemic, when we were starting to head down into some sort of physical distancing, actually household expenditure spiked because everyone was out there buying fucking toilet paper. So for household expenditure to be down on the quarter, and actually for us to have negative growth, or essentially a 0.3 negative growth in terms of economic output, is actually a really bad sign for where the economy was at before we headed into COVID. Now, we know that the quarter that's due to be reported in 3 months' time, the one that we're in the midst of right now, the one that will end at the end of this month, is going to be negative. And then we will have this sort of unenviable situation that we will see our economic growth. We'll essentially have a recession for the first time in 30 years. And that's a really troubling situation for Australia to be in right now. But I think, what we really want to be conscious of is that we shouldn't just excuse this recession as something that's been brought upon us by the pandemic. we were in a really weak state before that. But it also reminds us about how important it is that we return confidence back to households, and that, you know, fundamentally the engine room of our economy is driven by wages growth and people being in secure jobs that gives them the confidence to go out there and spend. And that's why it's really important to think about that in the context of the process that Sally outlined on the show last week, and indeed kicked off today in Sydney. And the reason that I'm up here today was because today unions sat down with the federal government and employers to kick off the process around sort of industrial relations reform. And what our movement made clear, and what Sally has outlined previously on the show, but in particular over the last week, is that really there are two thresholds that we must sort of cover off on if we're going to achieve serious economic and industrial relations reform in our country. The first is that Australians cannot afford to return back to the insecure work that's plagued this country for so many years. We have this unenviable situation of holding the world record when it comes to insecure work. And that has contributed to, along with the low wage growth the last 5 years, exactly what I've just talked about in terms of the economic numbers that we saw for the March quarter. We have to do something about secure work. In addition to that, we have to make sure that our bargaining system allows for working people to enjoy, you know, a fair distribution of the wealth that's created. You know, the government want to bang on and others want to bang on about productivity, and productivity is important, but the way in which we get improved productivity is that when workers genuinely believe that they're going to share in it. For the last 30 years, for basically a generation, working people have seen all of the productivity gains go to the top end of town. And that leaves people pretty, you know, bitter and disappointed when it comes to discussing. And I'm sure many of the people, you know, watching the show tonight can reflect upon their own enterprise bargaining situations where the boss just talks about, we need to improve productivity, and everybody turns around and knows exactly what that means. That just means me working harder or for less. We have to get back to the situation where workers are genuinely going to be able to enjoy the spoils of productivity. And that's how we sort of grow the pie. So those are the really important things that we want to drive through this process. And it's really important that we have the public support around that, because we have been campaigning for so many years around the importance of industrial relations reform that deals with those two central issues. So that's the other key event today. And finally, I also want to talk about a really big win that's happened this week, and it happened yesterday in New South Wales, where I am at the moment. And that was the work of unions in New South Wales fighting back against the state government here that tried to cap wages, and in fact, in real terms, tried to cut wages. And again, reflecting upon all of the economic data that came out today, it is just so important that public sector wages continue to grow, in particular in regional areas where public sector jobs are just so vital to those communities. If we get into a situation of cutting workers' wages, those are the communities, those are the small businesses that'll struggle through this pandemic. And indeed, we'll see a longer and deeper recession. So I really want to congratulate all of the public sector workers. All of these workers are the same workers, these essential workers that have gotten us through this pandemic. And it was absolutely shameful of the Liberal government up here to think that they could just cap wages, when in fact it's these workers that have gotten us through the pandemic. So it's been a big week, and it's great to sort of end the update on what is an absolutely fantastic win for New South Wales unions, and a really shining light to the rest of the country about how we should embark upon anyone who thinks that we're going to be able to cut our wages through this recovery, because it's definitely not the way in which, you know, unions are going to be approaching it. And it's actually the way in which, as we saw, the support that unions were able to get from the crossbench up here, the public support around ensuring that wages continue to grow, Emma.
Spot on, Liam. And if we can move on to the questions, because we do have a few that have come on, Liam. I've got a question here from Susan. So in terms of returning to work, what should she do if her employer doesn't have a COVID-safe return to work plan and isn't interested in any kind of consultation process with workers on that site? Should they just follow management lead, or what advice would you give them?
Well, it's a great question from Susan, and it's one we've heard a lot about. So, you know, we conducted some research over the last fortnight, and indeed it was in the news probably about a week ago. And Susan's not alone. You know, actually what we're seeing in workplaces is very little discussion and consultation with workers about how they make their workplaces COVID safe. You know, your employer has obligations to assess risks, to consult with you about those risks, and to put in place controls around minimising and mitigating those risks. Those are your health and safety rights. We launched a campaign last Friday around making your workplace COVID aware. And I'd encourage everybody to go to the website. I'll get Doc to put it into the chat again and spread it to all your mates. You know, that website takes you through a really clear checklist about how COVID safe your workplace is, and gives you some understanding about what are the key things you should be looking at. Importantly, health and safety reps and workers have got rights to insist upon these things. And in particular, you have rights to cease work when work is not safe. So, you know, I'd be saying to Susan, you know, have a look at that website, talk to your workmates. There's a great conversation guide in there about how you can talk to your workmates, and indeed talk to your employer about making sure that your work is COVID safe.
Thanks for that, Liam. Deborah's got a question here. With the need to change our economy after COVID, what about full employment? Is that a policy we should be advocating?
That is a great question, Deborah, and it is one that is very dear to my heart. I mean, full employment is a fundamental goal of our movement. Indeed, I should say that when we think about the people that have got the levers to pull when it comes to getting full employment, it is in the Charter for the Reserve Bank of Australia in terms of the welfare of the Australian people. We should be driving for full employment. We know that it's only through full employment that workers gain superior bargaining power. So absolutely, full employment is a mission of our movement. What we don't want to see as a debate, though, is that in some ways we are going to be able to reduce working conditions, and that will lead to full employment, which is what some in the community are talking about at the moment. What's really important about industrial relations reform is it provides secure jobs into the future, because as I said at the start of this segment, when it comes to economic growth, it is through workers' wages, spending in the economy, that our economy grows. And when our economy grows, that's how we can ensure that more and more people are employed. Now, too much of the debate over the last 30 years has been focused on what some would call the supply side, making sure that workers work for as little as possible, and that's how we increase employment. The reality is that it's when workers get secure jobs with decent wages, that's how our economy grows.
Liam, I think we have time for one more question, and it's an important one. It's from Gary, and you can imagine there are lots of people in this position at the moment. Is there anything that can be done to help older workers, in particular, who are losing work and face age discrimination in trying to get a new job?
Yeah, look, this is a really good question, and it's one that's come up not just in relation to older workers, but indeed other workers who might be sort of what they call marginally attached to work. Firstly, it is illegal to discriminate on the basis of age, like it is many other attributes in this country. And anyone who's discriminated on the basis of their age has legal recourse in relation to that, and they should speak to their union about that. But I think what's really important about this is really reflecting back upon JobKeeper and the way in which the government have structured JobKeeper. It's starting to become very clear and revealed that, you know, JobKeeper, in the way that it's been designed, the way that certain groups have been arbitrarily sort of cut out of JobKeeper, and in particular, you know, casuals and those that are, you know, marginally attached to work, is actually going to create an issue over the coming 6 months, because as potentially the economy increases, we're not going to see businesses taking on more workers. Instead, it's just going to be about filling up more hours of those that they already have JobKeeper for. This is a real problem, and it's one that I think we need to really be focused on, in particular, as the government announces this sort of review of JobKeeper. But, you know, we're very worried about older workers. We're equally worried about much younger workers who haven't entered the labour market yet, and who are looking down the barrel of potentially long periods of time because they're not on JobKeeper. Businesses are not necessarily going to offer them jobs. This is also another real concern that we've got.
Hey, Liam, thanks so much for answering those questions. And for our viewers, feel free to send them through solidarity@actu.org.au. We always get a few a week, and we try and get through as many as possible. So thank you for that, and thanks for the update as well. Now, our favourite segment of every week is Union Heroes on the Front Line. We have Jocelyn Hoffman. Are you there? Jocelyn is a aged care nurse.
Hi, I'm here. Hi, Emma.
Hi, Jocelyn. Welcome to the Solidarity Show.
Thank you.
So, Jocelyn, can you tell us a little bit about your job? Obviously, you're an aged care nurse. We're keen to hear about what your job entails and how it's been impacted around COVID.
Okay, I'm a registered nurse, and my role is complex and diverse. I'm responsible for coordinating, delegating, supervising the care provided by personal care workers. I collaborate with the allied health team to ensure that our residents get quality coordinated care. I mentor student nurses when they're put on placement. I assess my unwell residents in a timely manner and attend to whatever intervention is required. And the most challenging role I do is end-of-life care, where I aim that our residents' last journey is comfortable, dignified, and peaceful. And I guide and support their grieving families as well. That's the hard part, saying goodbye to our residents we have cared for a long time because they have become like family. It's a huge responsibility being an aged care nurse, but it's extremely rewarding on a personal level.
Thank you, Jocelyn, for all the work you do any time of year. But the circumstances that aged care finds themselves now due to the pandemic is absolutely extraordinary. Can you just take us through a little bit of what's been the changes and what does it look like in terms of how you have to deal with the potential of a COVID-19 outbreak in your facility?
Well, in aged care, our residents are at grave risk because of their complex health needs, their comorbidities, and their increasing frailty. So personally, I'm anxious to become the source of the infection and infect my residents and my colleagues and my family. So on my days off, I'm hyper vigilant with my hand hygiene and that 1.5 meter rule, and I only go out when it's essential because social distancing at work is impossible with hands-on care. Yeah, and World Health Organization designated 2020 as the year of the nurse and the midwife. They're not kidding. We're working tirelessly to save lives around the world.
That's exactly right, Jocelyn. I know Emma and I and everyone online, and we've seen it in the chat already, are extremely grateful of the work that you and your colleagues do in terms of supporting our older members of the community, in particular at a time like this. It just must be so tough for you and indeed for families who have potentially got loved ones in aged care facilities. But I want to ask you, I mean, how have you and your workmates been working together to deal with this crisis? Because it's obviously come at a time where you're essentially being sort of thrust into the middle of COVID.
Yeah, exactly.
You need to provide care on the one hand, but there are some really serious health and safety issues, but both for you and for those that you care for.
Yeah, it was quite overwhelming. But our union, the New South Wales Nurses and Midwives Association, provided us with support and advice when we were seeking information about this novel COVID-19, about our PPE and our rights, because there is a variation on what PPEs to wear on certain instances. Like if you're right in the heart of it, you have to wear all these different kinds of PPE, and the worry of not having enough PPE in the workplace was another worry, how to protect ourselves and our colleagues and our residents as well. So yeah, it started at that time when, you know, there's just so much information, there wasn't much information coming in. Yeah, it's quite frightening at that stage, but we had to be brave for our residents and not make them anxious. So because they're also seeing it in the television, and yeah, we gotta constantly reassure them as well.
Jocelyn, the Solidarity Show now reaches thousands of union members, and they're watching you today and they'll be watching you over the course of this week. Is there any message you have to fellow unionists across the country tonight?
Well, across the globe, we've seen COVID-19 pandemic. It has exposed under-resourced healthcare systems, which has led to catastrophic death tolls. In the United States alone, millions of people lost their jobs, and in that they lost their health insurance just when they need it most. So our universal healthcare has been shown to be a powerful tool to save more lives. So all of us unionists, we defended our Medicare and our universal healthcare system in 2016. And we have to continue defending this Australia's treasure. And also in aged care, I'm asking my fellow unionists to join us, aged care workers, to support us in our campaign for mandated ratios in aged care. And our call for more transparency and accountability into aged care funding for our residents, which, you know, they are our loved ones, and we will all be touched by this. So we gotta build a better aged care than what we have now. And if there's a message there for the non-union members watching, please join our union movement. There are a lot at stake post-COVID. The 2.5% wage freeze here in New South Wales is just the beginning. So I'd urge everyone to join us for a fairer, stronger Australia.
Jocelyn, thank you so much for joining this evening.
Well said.
Thank you.
Well said.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Jocelyn. And Liam,
Thanks, Jocelyn.
Liam,
Bye.
Jocelyn was talking about the important role in aged care, always as like in terms of palliative care and all the work they did, but also just talking about, you know, even the anxiety of coming in to work every day, not wanting to be a carrier, and the kind that carries on. That's 24/7, right, Liam, right now?
Oh, I mean, you know, it really brings home just how difficult it would be working in that sector. And in particular, I mean, Jocelyn touched on it towards the end. We shouldn't forget, you know, last year we had a Royal Commission into aged care that revealed some shocking stories about just how under-resourced this sector is, and that essentially the burden is just shifted to workers. And this pandemic, whilst, you know, we can be fortunate in this country that we've had a milder experience than what the rest of the world has, you know, I can only imagine how anxious both residents, but indeed workers, have been watching the news, indeed, you know, fearful of outbreaks in Australia, because it really brings home just how risky it is when you don't have secure jobs, access to things like pandemic leave, and how important those sort of protections are to make sure that workers are able to do the right thing in terms of staying away when sick.
Spot on.
So, Emma, next we've got Francis, a regular staple of the night. He's here. He's here to talk to us about all sorts of things, books, what to listen to, what to watch. I've sort of started teasing him about sport. Have we got any sport on it tonight, mate?
Not tonight. The rugby league, Liam, the only thing that's started so far, the AFL's to come. So we're slowly
I agree.
getting...
It's pretty slim then when it's only rugby league. Sort of trying to bait a few Queenslanders and...
And we want to keep our viewers.
But we do plenty of great things to watch on telly. That's one thing. And you know that I love what SBS online and on demand offers, because it's free and you can access it. And you also know that I have a thing for a really good spy drama. And there's a brilliant one that's starting. The second season starts tomorrow on SBS on demand, so you can watch it whenever you like. It's called False Flag. It's actually an Israeli series. The first one was really, really good. And the second one's getting great reviews as well. So it's set in the Middle East. This second series starts at a storyline starts at of an oil pipeline connecting Israel and Turkey, which is blown up at the inauguration, at the event that's supposed to sort of mark the start of that relationship. And there are 3 civilian citizens there who were meant to be there who disappear around the time of the blast. And their families get drawn into this drama about what went on there. And it's just full of spies and twists and turns. And it's really, really good. So if you like a spy drama, I can definitely recommend False Flag. Of course, it comes with subtitles. If you can deal with that, you'll be fine. But yeah, brilliant, brilliant series. And it's a real roller coaster. So that starts on SBS On Demand tomorrow. And of course, as I said, you can watch it at your leisure. You don't have to tune in at 8:30. You can watch it whenever you've got some free time during the day or later when you're on the couch wondering what to check in
Once you've obviously watched the Solidarity show, that is, because you can also watch this later. We've got our own little on-demand version, but it's good to have the live studio audience.
Yeah, I'll put the link to a review of it there in the chat so that people can check it out for themselves and see if it's for them. It's called False Flag.
I'll be on it. I love a good spy drama. Is there anything else for us this week, Francis?
Yeah, look, I would love to support new Australian music. It's something I've always done in my career when I was a broadcaster at Triple J and whatnot. And it's really nice to see that my old alma mater, Triple J, is still producing great Australian music. And this particular album that I'm going to talk about now, I'll do the Molly thing and hold it up. You can't probably see it. There it is. Hold it around the right way. It's by an artist called Sweet Whirl, and it's a beautiful record called How Much Works. And Sweet Whirl is Edith, and she is a Melbourne artist who was unearthed by Triple J. She's been around for 3 or 4 years playing in different bands. But this album that she's made, How Much Works, it's almost come fully formed. The songs are beautiful. It's a great record to listen to on your own while you're in isolation. If you think of sort of Joni Mitchell and someone like Lana Del Rey or even Tori Amos, it's got all those elements in it. The songs are sensational, and the more you listen to it, the more that it gets under your skin. I'll also link up the link into the messaging here for Bandcamp, where you can have a look at the record and listen to it online and check it out for yourself. But yeah, some great Australian music. The album is really worth checking out. It's called How Much Works by an artist called Sweet Whirl out of Melbourne. And just have a listen to that. And if you're tapping away at work at home and you need some tunes to get you through the afternoon, I can recommend this one.
Excellent, Francis. Well, thanks very much for that, comrade. A few things for everyone to get around this week.
Enjoy.
Thanks, mate.
See ya.
So next up, Emma, we've got a really special couple of guests who we previewed last week on the show. And we've got Robynne Murphy, who is a filmmaker, an activist, who has been active on many issues and a great unionist as well. And she's telling the story of how a group of women battled with, arguably Australia's largest company in making sure that we got equality in the workplace and that women got their fair share. I think what's really important with this, and we're also joined by Louise Casson, who is also an incredible union woman and was involved in the campaign. But I think, Emma, what I really like, and I'm hoping Louise is there and able to turn her camera on in a second, what I really love about this story, and I think it's really important, I was speaking to Doc about it earlier, is that a lot of the sort of current fight around equality, in particular gender equality, when it comes to work, is around feminized industries and making sure we get equal pay. What this campaign was actually about was making sure that women had access to the same work as men. And the fight that Robynne and Louise talk about and were engaged in is a really important fight of the time and really historic when we consider the achievements that was sort of meted out. So it's great to have Robynne and Louise here. Welcome, comrades.
Big welcome. I'm going to play the trailer before we get started. Ready? Okay.
A lot of these jobs in BHP surely would be very difficult, grimy, noisy, dirty jobs. I mean, do women in Port Kembla or Wollongong want these jobs?
Tents, banners and petitions presented an unfamiliar sight to steelworkers at Australian Iron and Steel today. The group is planning to file the first class action suit Australia has ever seen against the Steelworks company.
Is it crazy? You're not going to beat BHP.
Were you one of those women in the tents?
Well, one I nearly threw off the bridge because he was being very cheeky.
When I looked at the paper, job for women.
Women especially, they are good fighters.
No, wrong. There's people waiting long time, how many years?
But all these people have got the same type of face. I'm sure if you went in among there, half of them wouldn't know how to speak English.
We organised, we marched.
I want a job and I want to work, I have family.
We went to court. The company spent up big. BHP delayed and stalled.
One judge has referred to it as being as significant as the basic wage case.
If people get together, we can be strong, you can achieve a lot.
If it takes another 13 years, we'll be here.
I get absolute shivers down my spine just from watching that trailer. Robynne, tell us, this is a story of courage and determination. Can you tell us a little bit of the background of the story, your own involvement, but also what was at stake?
Look, before I say anything, it is Mabo Day, and I do want to pay my respects to the traditional owners of where I am, which is the Yuin people of the Walbunja clan. So past, present, future, whoever's out there. So it is Mabo Day. So what was the situation in Wollongong in 1980 was massive unemployment. 2/3 of the young were female that were unemployed, 2/3. And most of the work that was available for women was in ununionised and really bad conditions, sewing, not on an hourly rate or a weekly wage, but based on how many garments you could go through. So you can imagine the conditions, the safety conditions of things like that. And for many women in the area, if they couldn't find a job, they'd catch a bus about 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning up to Sydney to try and get work. And then I think really, and I suppose Louise would hopefully agree with this, the thing that really sort of got us going, we were in the Working Women's Charter, was a chicken shop owner who employed 40 women over the space of 6 months. And he had a flat upstairs where he took the women for a medical. And I mean, as we all know, when it's high unemployment, women do bear the brunt of that in terms of sexual harassment. And luckily, the parents of one of the girls contacted they were in the union. They then went to the Labour Council, and then that started this mushroom effect. A few months later, we set up the Jobs for Women Action Committee and a seminar. And then, so Louise can fill all the gaps in, but basically we started at that point. It was, and look, BHP, the big Australian, and we felt they had a responsibility. We thought, well, we're going to demand work from them. But when we went to the employment office, they just say there's no jobs for women. And you'd be standing there with a male next to you that'd get a job in a couple of weeks, and you'd be waiting years. So it was really blatant discrimination.
It's a really important story. I mean, Robynne, one thing I was reading this afternoon was that, you talk about going to the employment office, literally like it was 1% of the workforce were women. There were 2,000 women on the wait list for a job that were not getting jobs, and yet there were maybe 40 or 50 men who had no problems getting jobs, and the wait list was really small. I mean, Louise, you're obviously involved in this inspiring struggle. Can you tell us about your story and your involvement in the campaign? And you might be on mute, Louise. It's all right. There you go.
Better?
Yep, go for it.
I'm on Yagara country, and so I pay my respects to the traditional owners. Look, I've forgotten the question, but it's basically, it's like Robynne said, you couldn't get work. People wanted to have jobs. People were leaving, getting up at 4 o'clock, going off to Sydney to do jobs. It was a lot of piecework, and a lot of women were looking for work, and I happened to be one of them. And we joined up as a group and made a campaign and used all the avenues available to us, like making alliances within the union movement, with women's groups, and in the legal system. So it was just an ongoing campaign. It's a campaign that just continually gave, like from having demonstrations to going to court for fighting for legal aid. It just kept on, and for 3 courts. Equal Opportunity Tribunal, Supreme Court, the High Court. So it really was an ongoing and giving campaign.
You described just all the barriers and all the work that went into the campaign. And Robynne, the struggle for union women, this campaign was 14 years, like it was not short. How was the struggle sustained for so long?
Good question. I think one of the other really big challenges that we worked on as hard as we could was the fact that most of the women, the majority, like about 95% of the women, did not have English as first language. So that was key to our strategy. We had to ensure that those women got all the information, they were armed with that information, which gave them the confidence to keep on going. So everything was translated. We had about 5 or 6 languages that were translated in the first leaflet we ever put out to steelworkers, which we handed out at the Tent Embassy. So all the men got that, read that, and because most of them were men from other countries, they related to our discrimination straight away because they were discriminated against because they weren't Australian, they weren't the sort of average white Australian. So they took the leaflets home to their wives and friends, and it just grew. And so the key was just ensuring that we had information in all those languages. I think that was, yeah. And also, look, I think just solidarity is forever. I mean, it's what really, I think, kept us going. The fact that we kept on, I remember opening an envelope from a fellow. He says, I'm retired metal worker. He was from Perth, and it was a $2 note when $2 were in notes. And just fantastic, absolutely fantastic. I mean, and then actually making the film, we got, remember we got a $2 from a seafarer. That's what he described himself at. And we got a massive donation, of course, from our union, the AWU, and from the AC2U. And so the film and the campaign, in a way, are very similar. But yeah, I think it's just the massive support from the union movement. Thank you, everybody out there.
Robynne, solidarity is forever. And Louise, being on such a campaign, what are some of the highlights for you? What are you never going to forget?
Well, you're never going to forget working at the steelworks, for example. You're never going to forget. I mean, that was great because you learn about using tools. That's the sort of thing that has stayed with me for life, being able to use a range of tools, wheelbarrows, etc. But you meet women and you go to their homes and you meet their family and you try all this different sort of food. You have a 2-hour meeting is going to take a day because with all the interpreters that you use. I mean, those sort of, that's kind of a really warm and enjoyable part of that campaign. I think the court case was really significant, and that was a really different thing to understand that for me, being told that no jobs for women was enough to say there was discrimination, but to see how a court case unfolds and the sort of information that you needed to challenge in the courts. It was really, those are things, but for sure, all the people that we've met and all the jobs that we won. But it's things like Robynne was saying, a young woman from high school writing to us saying, I do tech drawing, it's because of you, your campaign. I mean, things like that. Women are doing stuff. I think almost immediately BHP started to have adverts of women in the Pilbara on big trucks. I mean, the affirmative action campaign in Whyalla at BHP started during our campaign. So, I mean, I think you make a lot of friends and you can show that without the union, we would not have won.
Yeah. Well, I want to come to the court case, Robynne, because, it did go all the way to the Supreme Court, and the decision has been described as the most important piece of discrimination legislation that's occurred in this country. And I want you to tell me a little bit about that. But what some people don't realise, it sort of happened in 2 waves as well. There was the initial getting of the work, but then there was the downturn that you talked about, where because of sort of last on, first off, there were a lot of women that actually lost work as a result. So can you talk about the court case and why it is considered this most important piece of discrimination litigation in our country?
Well, the laws had been in existence for about 3 or 4 years, 4 or 5 years by the time we actually took the company to court, because they fought all the way. And we were on uncharted ground in the sense that we didn't know what was happening with this legislation. We didn't know how strong or how weak it was. And we also took the law with a grain of salt because we weren't confident that the law would come on our side. But as it was, the law did work for us, the Equal Opportunity Tribunal and the anti-discrimination legislation. Because what we were testing, we were saying, and I don't know how many unions still have a principle of last on, first off. It was a very strong union principle to protect workers, particularly aged workers we were talking about earlier, or delegates, so that a company can't just, when there is a so-called downturn, they can't just lay off who they want. But in our case, because we'd been discriminated against at the point of employment and waited years rather than 2 weeks like the men, we lost a potential seniority. So when we got retrenched, we were double whammied around that. It's sometimes a little bit complicated to explain, but it's the first time that indirect discrimination was ever taken up in court, and we won that. And then so the other thing was that we were adamant about ensuring, we wanted to protect all of the women, so we wanted to run a class action. But we couldn't run a class action because we hadn't set a precedent. So we had to run for 34 women before we ran for a class action. So there were a lot of weaving that went on in the court case itself as well. So we finally ran the class action after the Supreme Court and the High Court that Louise talked about. But yeah, look, I think for a lot of the women, they went to court and their concept of going to court was that it was only for bad people, that only bad people went to court. And so the education of the women that didn't have English as a first language, again, I come back to that, was key to them being able to feel confident about going to court.
And what about the documentary itself? Can you tell us a little bit about how it was made?
Well, it's a very unusual film, and it's basically been made by the support of unions, individuals, women's groups, the progressive movement generally. Unlike any other, it's not a polished Hollywood film, but it has been described as a rough diamond. It's a really exciting, dramatic film, even though it's a documentary. It's full of lots of exciting things happening. There's sad bits, there's horrific bits, there's happy bits, funny bits, and it's a film for what I call, it's a film for the little people, made by the little people. It's not Hollywood, but I am sure everyone's going to love it because I think you can relate to it. And I guess I was driven to make the film because it's part of me, it's part of my heart, but also I don't think that we're good at documenting our history, and particularly wins. And so, and this was a really important win because it did set the precedent that Louise was talking about. And it's taken a while. I know that, you know, some union comrades are saying, when are you going to finish that film? But, you know, not only have we finished it, but it's a finalist at the Sydney Film Festival. So that's a double whammy. It's fantastic.
Outstanding, outstanding. And we're going to have to get to the Sydney Film Festival because I don't want to miss that. Louise, I just want to have a final question for you is, like, what was it like revisiting these memories in the campaign for the documentary? What was that experience like for you?
Well, you just have to remember. I mean, you just have to start thinking about what went on. I mean, we were fairly, because of the court case, we were fairly well documented with manuscripts, but also I'd collected press releases from the day we started the campaign, you know what I mean? So we had a lot of information we could go over in notebooks, and just talking to Robynne and the other women about what's going on and just trying to jog our memories. I must say, Robynne always wanted to make that film right from the 1980s. She talked about making a film because it was just an exciting time in our lives.
Well, look, it is an exciting time. And I think to Robynne's point, it is so important that our movement tells stories, in particular tells stories of wins, because it's through storytelling that we teach future generations of the power of unions. So Robynne, I mean, the film is showing as part of the Sydney Film Festival, which is of course virtual this year. You can't go to a cinema and watch it. It's been shortlisted for a prize, and no doubt your union comrades watching tonight all want to see it. How can they best get behind the film and, more importantly, take action to make sure that you win?
I don't know whether you have any say in it winning. I think that's a...
Don't put it beyond us.
I think the best thing that everyone can do, so Sydney Film Festival's actually online for everyone completely around Australia, which is great. So it's no longer in the hands of just the Sydney film buffs, but it's in our hands. So you can log on to Sydney Film Festival, you find there's a little box for the documentaries, you hit that. And unfortunately, you have to buy a ticket for this one, being the world premiere. We'll get $7 of the $14 ticket that you buy, but you might want to buy a bulk of the documentaries, because there's also some great filmmakers. There's a fantastic Aboriginal filmmaker that's in that top 10 as well. And then there's some dramas. So look, go for it, whatever you want, but you can watch it anywhere, anytime from the 10th of June to the 21st of June. And then after that, once it's safe, I'm really looking forward to showing the film to everybody in the union movement. I love, there's nothing like a premiere where you can sit in the audience and see what everyone's reaction is. But separately, watch it at Sydney Film Festival, because it will prove that we've got a fantastic viewership there.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Robynne and Louise, for coming on tonight and sharing your story, and for all the work that you've done in putting this film together. We wish you all the best in terms of its success at the festival, and we're going to talk about how we as a movement can get behind it and really take it to the rest of the country in terms of making sure that everybody sees it. So thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very, very much. And look, no union meeting ends without an ask, and this is our weekly ask, and this one's really important. Showing solidarity is buying a ticket to go seeing Women in Steel. It's $14. You heard it. $7 goes back to the campaign and the documentary itself. It's at Sydney Film Festival. It is a finalist, and we know that we know how to put bums on seats. It's bums on your couch any time of day that you want to watch it. Buy your ticket, and more importantly, not just get your own ticket, but make sure you reach out to your workmates, all your friends, union members. They're going to want to see it as well, aren't they, Liam?
Absolutely. And look, I did press Robynne about how we can make them win, and she might be right that getting them to win might be beyond our powers, but there is some really important stuff. And when we talk about getting people to watch this, what we'd really love to see happen is get ABC or SBS to pick up this documentary and broadcast it to the country. I talked before about how important it is that we tell union stories, in particular union wins, and this is a great example of both of those. The more people that buy those tickets and watch this film at the festival, the better the chance is that we'll get one of those two networks to pick it up and show it to the rest of the country, because that's how we sort of grow our movement, by sharing our stories.
That is wonderful. I also want to just say, before I hand over for the final word, I guarantee everybody is going to be buying a ticket tonight, but I just want to do a little shout out. There's a few people that joined the First Nation Workers Alliance tonight. Yeah, congratulations to you. I didn't see everyone, but I saw John, your name. Congratulations for joining the First Nation Workers Alliance. Liam, over to you for some final words.
Absolutely, Emma, and I wanted to call that out as well. Excellent work to everybody getting behind the First Nation Workers Alliance. An excellent week to be joining. Look, I want to go back to what we said in the update. I mean, the phase that we are in as a movement right now, while we are discussing industrial relations reform with the government and employers in this country, is really important. We know what the government ultimately want to do, and indeed they do have ideas that they want to take to the Parliament. It is absolutely incumbent upon us as a movement to continue to make the case about why our industrial relations laws are not working for working people. We did that effectively over the last 5 years. We can continue to keep doing it, because we know that when it comes to later in this year, when this reform process is over, that's when the real fight will really start to begin. So we're very aware of that. We want to make sure that we continue to take the fight, and it's important that we continue to fight to win secure work and better wages for all Australians. So that's my sort of final word. It'll be a regular feature of this show over the coming weeks to keep people updated on what's going on, and indeed the campaign that we're mounting to make sure that we carry that message through the year.
Spot on. Have a great night. Good week, everybody. See you next Wednesday.
Stay safe.